All right, so buckle up because we're diving deep into some financial statements today.
Always exciting.
It is. We're looking at Polycab's second quarter performance, fiscal year 2025.
Right.
We've got the financials, we've got the earnings presentation. Let's see if Polycab is really, electrifying the market.
Yeah, and for those who may not know, Polycab is a big player when it comes to wires, cables, fast-moving electrical goods, the FMEG market,
hmm
everything from, the wiring in your house to that new ceiling fan you might be eyeing.
Right.
They also do some EPC work, like big power distribution projects, so these quarterly results, they're really important for understanding where their strategy is going and if it's working.
Yeah, it's like a little behind-the-scenes peek, right?
hmm
Seeing how the sausage is made.
Absolutely.
And one of the first numbers that kind of jumps out is their revenue growth this quarter, significantly higher than the same period last year.
It is. I think investors are probably feeling pretty good about that, honestly.
Yeah, definitely a good sign that they're gaining some traction, especially considering everything going on in the economy right now.
Yeah.
But, and there's always a but, right?
Right.
Their profit also increased, but not at the same pace as the revenue. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it's something to look at. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be part of a bigger strategy on Polycab's part.
Okay, so are we talking like big investments in like R&D, new product lines, that sort of thing?
Possibly. Or it could be a sign that their operating costs have increased.
Right.
That's something we're going to have to look into as we, go further down.
Unpack a little bit.
Yeah, unpack it.
And of course, we can't forget, the lifeblood of any business, cash flow.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting with a company like Polycab.
Okay, why is that? What makes their cash flow situation unique?
Well, their business model relies a lot on inventory, on trade credit. We're talking about physical goods, giving customers time to pay. It can put a strain on cash flow if it's not managed really well, especially with, commodity prices always fluctuating.
Yeah, for sure.
And looking at this report, there's a pretty big swing in their cash flow this quarter compared to last year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that's something to watch.
So we've got like this really strong revenue growth. The profit situation is a little interesting. We'll dig into that more. And then cash flow is sending some mixed signals. So I'm curious, before we really unpack all of it, based on just those initial numbers, how are you feeling about Polycab's performance? Are you like optimistic? Are you a little unsure?
A little from column A, a little from column B.
Right, a little both.
Yeah.
Well, keep those initial impressions in mind as we start to go deeper.
Yeah.
All right, so let's unpack some of these numbers a little bit further, huh?
Yeah, let's do it.
One of the things I thought was really interesting looking at this was the breakdown of their segment performance. So we know wires and cables, that's like their bread and butter.
Right. Makes up a big chunk of their revenue.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're also, making a play for the consumer market with the fast-moving electrical goods segment, the FMEG.
Right.
All that, fans, lights, switches, all the stuff that seems to be like flying off the shelves these days.
Yeah, and it makes sense for them to do that, right? I mean, they're diversifying their revenue streams.
That's smart.
Yeah, their wires and cables business, yeah, it's big, but it's also tied to these infrastructure projects,
Right.
which we know can be impacted by, economic slowdowns, politics, all those things.
A lot of externalities there.
Exactly. But the FME segment, that's driven by consumer demand, which tends to be a little bit more, resilient.
For sure. People are always going to need light bulbs.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
even if one segment takes a hit, the other one can kind of help them out, right?
It's like diversifying your portfolio, but you're doing it with business segments.
Exactly. And when you look at the numbers, we actually see that their FMEG segment is growing at a much faster rate than their wires and cables, which tells you they're probably tapping into a pretty good market there,
Yeah.
potentially taking some market share from competitors as well.
Interesting. Okay. So they're playing the field strategically there.
Yeah.
But what about the whole inventory management piece of this? Because it's not like they're selling, digital products. We're talking about warehouses full of copper wire and ceiling fans.
Right, and that's a great point because inventory management is so important for a company like this, especially with how volatile things are with commodity prices these days.
Huge, yeah.
If they've got too much inventory, then they're sitting on all this stuff, right?
They wait, yeah.
Exactly, and if those prices drop, they're losing money. But if they have too little, then they can't, meet demand.
Can't sell it if you don't have it.
Exactly, so it's all about finding that sweet spot.
So are they walking that tightrope?
Well, if you look at the reports, their inventory levels are up this quarter, which, on the surface might seem a little bit concerning,
Yeah.
but, and this is a big but, it looks like their inventory levels aren't growing faster than their revenue.
Okay.
So that suggests to me they're keeping pace with that demand.
Good.
Not overstocking.
Right.
Managing that turnover.
Keeping it all moving. Right. So far, so good. But we do have to, address the elephant in the room. Commodity prices.
Right, of
I mean,
course.
Polycab, they need copper, they need aluminum. We've seen those prices all over the place lately.
Absolutely. And not just that, the foreign exchange rates, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of that impacts their bottom line.
Big time. And those are things that they can't really control directly.
Right.
But, I mean, they can manage the risk, right? That's where the whole hedging strategy comes into play.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. Now, for our listeners who, maybe haven't been following along with all the financial terms, can you break down just really quickly what hedging means in this context?
Sure. Think of it like this. Hedging is basically a form of financial insurance.
Okay.
So Polycab is using different financial instruments, things like commodity futures, foreign exchange forward contracts, to basically lock in prices for the future.
So they're saying, like, we know we need X amount of copper wire in 3 months. We're willing to pay a little bit more now to make sure that, the price doesn't go through the roof later.
Exactly.
Okay.
It helps them reduce the impact of those big price swings.
Right.
So they're not caught off guard. Now, does it eliminate all the risk? No.
Right.
But it allows them to forecast a little bit better.
It takes a little bit of the guesswork out of it.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's like one of the tools in their tool belt.
Right.
So I guess this is where you come in, dear listener. As we're talking about this, as we're going through these different aspects, segment performance, inventory, hedging, what's standing out to you? What are you kind of zeroing in on? Keep those questions in mind because we're about to move beyond the balance sheet and get into some of the less quantifiable stuff. All right, so we've got the numbers, we've looked at the balance sheet. Now it's time to put on our analyst hats and try to read between the lines a little bit.
Right. Get into the minds of Polycab's management team.
Exactly. Beyond just the hard data, what are they saying about their own performance?
Well, going through their earnings presentation, I'd say they're cautiously optimistic. They know that there are challenges out there, like the volatile input costs, the competition in the industry, but they also made sure to highlight their strategic initiatives.
Yeah, they seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on expanding their distribution network, which makes sense if they're trying to really grab more market share.
Right, and they talked about their R&D investments, too. Sounds like they're serious about innovation, staying ahead of the curve.
Which is important in a sector like this, right? I mean, new technologies pop up, consumer preferences change, you got to be able to adapt.
Absolutely.
Something else that caught my eye was their focus on premium product segments. What's the thinking there? Is that just about higher profit margins, or is there something else going on?
I think it's a smart move, actually. I mean, they're in a competitive market, right? By developing these premium product lines, they can charge higher prices, of course, but it's also about, like, attracting a certain kind of customer, right?
Right.
It's brand prestige, differentiating themselves from just being the cheapest option out there. Think about it this way. Would you rather be known for just selling the cheapest cables or, the most reliable, innovative cables?
Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
It's a long game. Build that reputation, hopefully get some customer loyalty down the line.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But, got to ask the tough questions, right? Are there any red flags, anything that kind of sets off alarm bells a little bit that investors should be, like, really watching closely?
Well, there are always going to be things that need a closer look. For example, in this report, they mentioned some related party transactions.
Okay, and those aren't necessarily a bad thing, right?
No, not inherently.
But you got to be careful.
You have to understand what's happening, how much, make sure everything's transparent, no funny business going on.
Right, because even if there's nothing shady actually happening, the perception of that can really hurt a company.
Absolutely.
Transparency is key. Anything else in the report that you saw that you were like, huh, this is interesting. Maybe it's something, maybe it's nothing, but I'm going to keep my eye on it.
Yeah, there's one thing. They're increasing their investments in other financial assets, is how they put it.
Interesting.
Now, it's not a huge amount of money yet,
Okay.
but it has been growing, bit by bit each quarter.
So they're diversifying.
Yeah.
I mean, that's generally a good thing for financial management,
Okay.
right? Spread the risk a little bit.
Exactly. Explore some new opportunities potentially. But of course, it makes you wonder, what are they investing in exactly?
Right, because the report doesn't really say.
Not specifically. So are they, buying up real estate? Are they getting into tech startups?
Ooh, Interesting.
Who knows? It'll be interesting to see what they disclose in future reports because that might tell us, where they see themselves going in the long term.
Yeah, what their risk appetite is like.
Exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Polycab, what are you taking away from all of this?
Well, I think the big takeaway for me is that they seem to be navigating a tough market fairly well.
Okay.
They're diversifying. They seem to be managing their inventory well. They're trying to mitigate the risks that are out there. But there are still some big questions, right? Like, what's their long-term growth really look like?
Right.
How effective are those hedging strategies actually going to be?
And what is with these other investments?
Exactly. So, lots to think about, lots to watch.
Yeah, this is a stay tuned situation.
Absolutely.
It's like we've uncovered a lot, but there's still like more to come, more chapters in this story.
Exactly.
So to everyone listening, keep digging, don't be afraid to ask those tough questions and pay attention to the details. Happy investing, everybody.